As he mentioned, most of y'all know me. I'm Dr. Miller, you know me as Jared. Some of the students in the room might not know me. Some of you who do know me professionally might know that my job title has changed, and this is not an exaggeration, 11 times in the last 3 years. So currently, right now, as Dr. Barr said, I'm the interim vice president of student success, which is something very different for me. It's been exciting, exhausting, but rewarding work. I am, in real life, Dean of Division III. Currently, we have Dr. Matthew Newton, who is the acting Dean of Division III, and I trust him not to destroy the division in my absence. In all seriousness, I've known him for a long time. He's doing a great job. Speaking of a long time, that picture of me, I was looking at that thinking, man, I was so young and innocent, naive. That was taken 11 years ago when I first started working here. And I first started working here as a psychology professor. So I put up there former psychology professor. I still consider myself one. I do teach one class a semester. I'm allowed to teach that one class a semester in an administrative role, and I really enjoy doing it. I feel like it helps me stay connected to the students, connected to teaching, and connected to why I got into education in the first place, which is one of the reasons why I like to give these kinds of talks, because I don't get the opportunity to get up in front of groups of people and speak about things, especially things that I really enjoy, like travel or space flight or whatever it may be. So before we get into the talk, I want to ask you all a question. Well, I'll give you a little disclaimer off the bat. Every picture that you will see in here is a picture that I took. Some of them are higher quality than others, because most of them over the last 5 or 6 years were taken with some version of this guy right here. I used to travel around with a big camera and take really nice pictures, and I realized that was sort of taking me out of the moment of living in the experience. That combined with the fact that cell phones just got a hell of a lot better at taking pictures, I sort of transitioned. But when they get blown up a bit, they're a little bit pixelated, that's why. So let me ask you all a question. I'm going to get a vote. This picture, I want you to take a guess, because sometimes pictures can inform you about kind of what's going on around them. If you look at the lighting, look at the shadows, what time of day would some of y'all guess that this picture was taken? Yeah?
12 a.m.
12 a.m.? 4 a.m.? Any other guesses? Do y'all know where this picture was taken? Or have a guess as where maybe it was taken? What made you say 12 a.m.? What made you say 4 a.m.? North, right? North in the summer. How many of y'all know what happens when you get up at really extreme latitudes during the summer? Sun never goes down, right? So if we split the difference between y'all's two guesses, you're pretty much right on. This picture was taken last summer at 2 a.m. So I was not just standing outside at 2 a.m. waiting to see a polar bear. I was asleep. I was on a boat, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. We got an announcement over the intercom saying there's a polar bear. There's a whisper over the intercom, everyone be quiet. So I wandered up to where I thought the polar bear was, realized there's no one around me and I don't see a polar bear. Then very quickly after that realized or had the thought, am I wearing pants? Because I had rolled out of bed and it's cold and I'm thinking, I really hope I was, thankfully. Then found the group of people, found the polar bear and took that picture. So I want to start with a couple just general ideas here. The first one, and this might seem obvious, well, why don't people travel? Well, there are some very obvious reasons why people, especially young people, because I was a young person once, wouldn't travel. Financial constraints is the first one that pops into everyone's mind. Time constraints, family commitments, work commitments. That's not what I want to focus on here, because everyone knows about those commitments and those sort of reasons why someone might not explore beyond where they're at. I want to focus on the people that could travel that choose not to, because it's a very foreign concept to me, but as I've grown older and talked to people, there's a lot of people that just don't have a desire to travel. So what are some of the reasons why might that be? I looked into it, and there are some psychological reasons. One, and I think a lot of us will be familiar with this, I'm very familiar with it in my everyday life, comfort zone preservation. That's exactly what it sounds like. Our comfort zone is called a comfort zone for a reason. It feels nice to be in our comfort zone, and it can be hard to step outside of our comfort zone. For a lot of people, giving a presentation would be way outside of their comfort zone. It's not for me, but that would be an analogy that you could draw. In my everyday life, my comfort zone is hugely important. I really, really don't like to step outside of it. Like an ideal for weekend for me is doing nothing. Staying at home, just doing whatever I want. I've got two passions, travel and guitar, and the guitar has turned into a crippling guitar addiction. But I don't want to go out and do a bunch of stuff. I like that comfort zone. So being intentional about getting beyond that was something that got me into travel. Fear of the unknown, that goes hand in hand with comfort zone preservation. If you're going to travel to a place that you've never been, or interact with a culture that you've never interacted with, that by definition is going to be an unknown. And just generally speaking, as people, we don't like that. Even when something is bad and we know about it, or we know when it's gonna happen or how it's gonna happen, we feel better than when it's just sort of hanging over us. That's one piece of this puzzle. Social anxiety, I can very much speak to this. Throughout college, really grad school, and even my first 2 years here, I would have what I would describe as a crippling social anxiety. Now, when I would tell my students about this in class, or even sometimes my coworkers, they would be very surprised. Because when I get up and I talk in front of a group of people, or when I give presentations in class, that wouldn't come out. But put me in a social setting, or an unfamiliar situation, or like my absolute nightmare, a party, and then I would shut down. Like someone would say something very simple to me, and I would look at them and think, words. I should be saying words right now, but not know what to say. I have completely overcome that, and I credit some of that to travel. I would not be the person I am today without my travel experiences. Every time I travel, I feel like it kind of redefines who I am and helps me grow a little bit. Perceived lack of control. Some of us, especially some of us in academia, really like to have a sense of control over things. And when we're traveling, there's a lot that's outside of our control. If you're getting on a plane, you're not flying the plane. You don't get to decide if it's going to be on time or not, or if you're going to make your connection. So that lack of control can cause people not to travel. And then this is a big one, negative past experiences. If you've had a past experience that didn't go so well traveling, say you were delayed, you missed a flight, the trip got all messed up, that can turn you off to traveling in the future. So with these in mind, I want to talk about some of the psychological benefits, sort of make an argument as to why we should value travel if we can, why we should consider it an important part of the human experience. Now, as I go through this, I've got all these pictures up here, I'm going to try to tell you kind of the context of them, which will be more meaningful when we get into the actual psychological benefits, but just so you know what you're looking at, because I like to know what I'm looking at. So this first one was taken in southern Arizona in Petrified Wood National Forest. It was about 110 degrees that day. It was the summer of 2020, so COVID, which is one of the reasons I was out there. And there weren't a lot of people around, right? The picture next to it, does anyone have any guess where that might be? How many of y'all think it's in the United States? Got a couple. It is in the US. It's Hawaii, right? So this was a very memorable hike that we did in Hawaii. This was at the beginning. Most of the hikes that I've taken in my lifetime are either, out and back, or the ideal, a circuit, right, where you're going around and not seeing the same thing every time. There are some hikes, and some of you have probably experienced this, where you start at the top, you go down, and then you have to work your way back. That's when you can get yourself into trouble, and that's what happened on this hike. We went down, and we went too far down, and it's completely exposed, and it took us about 6.5 hours to get back up, because it was about 3,500 feet, about half of which was in sand, which for any of you who have tried to even walk or hike in sand, it's not the easiest process in the world. So those are those two pictures. So why travel? What are the psychological benefits to travel? Before we get into that, I want to make a disclaimer about what the talk is not, because I know I've had some of my colleagues ask me about this. And I'm sure they'd love for me to give a talk on this, but it would be like a whole semester-long talk. A how-to guide about how to travel, how to use credit cards to get points, all those sorts of things. It's not that. It's not, there you go, travel hacks. It's not travel recommendations. I could talk about where I've been all day long, but travel is very individualized. Certain people like certain kinds of trips. Other people don't. People also travel differently. Some people travel really spontaneously, either in planning or while they're on the trip. Other people are like me and have spreadsheets and documents that detail every single thing they're going to be doing at every moment of the day, because I like to know what the plan is for every morning. So very different, right, based on the person. Both of these pictures were also taken in Hawaii. I put them here at sort of the top of the talk because it fit in nicely to what Dr. Barr was talking about, one of my other passions, which is space and space travel. These are observatories up in Hawaii that you can get to pretty easily from driving, not having to hike. All right, another very important reason why I value travel. This was taken my first year of graduate school. I went to school at the University of Notre Dame at the very top of Indiana. It's right at the border between Indiana and Michigan. I live most of my life and call my hometown San Antonio. My wife, wasn't my wife at the time because we were 22, she spent her entire life in San Antonio, had never seen snow. This was the first winter. This is not a several days or several months accumulation of snow. This was one night, and there was no snow in the forecast. I woke up that morning, walked out, saw that, and thought, well, I guess we're off school today. Nope. We all went to school and went to work that day, and there was it was not quite 36, but it was 34 inches of snow on the ground. So the reason that happens there, I found out, is because it's on the, I'll call it the wrong side of Lake Michigan. So you've got Chicago, if you go to about 2 hours essentially east, you'll get to South Bend, you get the lake effect snow on the other side. So you get about twice as much snow in South Bend as you do in Chicago, which necessitated that I travel, especially in the winter, to maintain my sanity. So I did grow up traveling, my wife did not. She's a big traveler now, but this is kind of where it started in my youth. All right, so I'm going to talk about 5 sort of top-level psychological benefits to travel, and then unpack some of the things that contribute to those benefits, and then try to tie them a little bit to some of my travel experiences that I'm not just showing you random pictures like I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. I want to talk about kind of why it was meaningful to me, or to give you a little backstory. So the first one is enhanced perspective. That probably doesn't surprise you. Traveling and seeing new things and things that you don't see every single day changes your perspective, not just of your surroundings and the world and other people, but of your place in the world. It can change how you view your role. It can change where you are, how you feel about where you're going. I'll also mention that most of the pictures here are only about 5 or 6 years old. I could give you a fancy reason for why that is. The real reason is I ran out of time to dig through older pictures and put them in here. So I said, let's do with the ones that are on Google Photos. I'll slide those in because it's the easiest for me to do. So part of what contributes to enhanced perspective, number 1, cultural exposure. Not every trip you take is going to be some cultural experience, right? When I did our COVID road trip, which we drove 6,500 miles around the 4 corners, so Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, there were different cultures there, but it wasn't a massively different cultural experience that I normally have, especially because I was born and lived for many years in Colorado. But some will have different cultural experiences. One of the ones that pops out in my mind was in Indonesia, which we went to a few places, but we spent most of our time in Bali, which is that middle picture there. We connected with several local people to show us around and actually explain to us what we were looking at, to understand the value of what was there and the value of just their day-to-day experience. I think that was the most interesting thing, just to see how does your average daily lived experience compare to mine. And you can see all of the differences, but then at a fundamental level, you can see, oh, we're doing a lot of the same stuff, just kind of in a different way. There's that sort of shared human experience that you can get there. Global awareness, of course, if you're traveling outside of the country, you're going to have an enhanced global awareness. This picture on the, to y'all, top right, I guess, you could probably tell that it's of Paris. You can see the Eiffel Tower way in the distance. The reason I included this one is this was the view out of our hotel room that became very memorable to me one night when I was sleeping, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I hear loud explosions and screaming and flashing. And I wake up and I'm like, what is going on? Like, is the city under siege? What's happening? Because it's loud. I sleep with earplugs in. It's going right through the earplugs. I sort of stumble out of bed, walk to the window, and I should have taken a picture of it, and I didn't, and I regret that. And there had to be thousands of fireworks going off. There's cars everywhere. There's people in the street like screaming and yelling, and I'm starting to realize that I think they're happy. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but they seem to be celebrating something, and there's smoke bombs going off. And then it dawns on me, because I'm sort of in a daze, I'm a big soccer fan. I had not remembered that that night was the final of the Africa Cup of Nations. Senegal was playing, I don't think it was Liberia. Actually, no, I think it was Liberia. In France, very international city. There's a lot of Senegalese, there's a lot of Liberians. That was Algerians. The night before walking around, you could tell everyone's getting ready for the game, they're getting excited. I would say, and for those of you who know a little bit about history, it probably won't surprise you, the Algerians in France probably outnumbered the Senegalese 10 to 20 to 1. So there's a lot more Algerians or people of Algerian descent living in France. So when Algeria won the African Cup of Nations, they were very excited. So it was this huge celebration, everyone was out on the street, and it was a really interesting sort of awareness to have of this group of people that now call France their home, celebrating a victory from either where they came from or where their parents came from in a sort of different cultural context. And then open-mindedness, realizing that there is a world out there so far beyond our daily lived experience. And one of the most eye-opening sort of instances I've had of that was when I was in Singapore. Some of y'all might recognize that. That's essentially connected to the airport in Singapore, which is sort of a mind-blowing experience in and of itself. And seeing things that we walk around and we're like, look at all the technology and all the great things we have. And when you walk around a lot of those areas and you think, oh, what we've got sort of pales in comparison to what they've got going on right now. And then also just to see different political systems in play. So there's a lot about Singapore that's really great. There's also a lot about Singapore that's very authoritarian. And I have a picture of this, and I couldn't find it, but when you go through customs there, and if for any of you who have traveled to Singapore, you will have experienced this, they make it very well known, you do not bring drugs into that country, because you get a little stamp and it's in red, and it says it could be punished by execution. So there's a lot of things that are really nice going on, and then you see that, and you're like, oh, okay, well, all right. So it just helps you get a little more of a broad sort of understanding of what's happening. Self-discovery can be a big part of an enhanced perspective. Does anyone know, I have any idea where that picture might have been taken?
San Antonio?
Yep, that's taken in my hometown in San Antonio. It was taken in my hometown when I revisited it 2 or 3 years ago. We decided, it was sort of during COVID. It was like that weird interim we had where like, we have vaccines available, it's not full blown anymore, but things are still kind of shut down, so we're trying to figure out where we're gonna go. Like, let's go back to San Antonio as tourists and see what it's like. So it actually gave me a new appreciation for where I come from, having not been there for a long time, and seeing it from a different perspective. I've walked by this building, church, hundreds of times, and I was like, that's cool. But I was sort of struck that evening standing by it by thinking, oh, this is a beautiful building, and in this lighting and in this context, it's something I hadn't appreciated before. The whole Riverwalk area, in fact, where this is closely located to. Can give you a greater historical understanding. The history professors in the room will love this. Anytime I travel, beforehand, I get sort of obsessed with wherever I'm going, and then I start to read history books over it, because I want to learn more about what I'm seeing, which then just helps my knowledge base, right? Yeah. And then building empathy, just seeing other people and seeing what they're going through and sort of living a different experience. This picture up here, that's my wife. It's not a random person that I took on the bus. This is on the second level of the double-decker buses in England, which was a really memorable night because we got on a route that wasn't very crowded. We had the second level to ourselves. And if you've ever been on one of those buses, if you're on the second level, there's a huge window in front of you, and you could basically take a self-guided tour of the city. And that's some of the self-discovery I'm talking about there. It was awesome to sit there and just sort of enjoy the sights. I left my Oyster card, which is what allows you to get on the bus that night too, so I had to buy a new one, which was less fun. All right, living in the moment. Of the 5, I would say in the world that we live in now, to me, this is probably the most important one. You'll hear people bemoan all the time how we are constantly connected to everything, and it's true, we are, but it's also a reality that we're not just gonna magically disconnect ourselves. It's how we function now. It's the world in which we live. Unfortunately, sometimes our jobs ask us to be connected beyond when we probably should be. Some of you who heard Chancellor Castillo speak last week may be able to relate to that. Being able to disconnect from that and sometimes being forced to disconnect from that is really, really healthy. To get away from that, even if it's not your job, just the constant bombardment of digital information. So what I have up here are a bunch of pictures that I took from national parks in the country. We have visited a lot of them. Pretty much every national park, not in Alaska, that is west of the Mississippi, so all the good ones, we visited at this point because we really got into it 7 or 8 years ago, and I had to drag my wife to the first one. She's like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it. And she loves it almost more than I do now. And every time I'm out there on a trail, getting away from people and just getting away from the hustle and bustle, I feel sort of at peace and I feel at ease, and I feel like it helps sort of rejuvenate me for whatever it is I need to do when I get home. It's sort of reconnecting in a certain way. And a little tip, any of y'all that are going to any kind of national parks or state parks or whatever it is, and you get there, you're like, oh man, I wanted to go out here, I wanted to get away from people, and there's like 10,000 people in this parking lot, get on a trail and walk more than a mile. If you go more than a mile, 95% of them are gone, and then you're out there by yourself, and it's great. You just got to go. Don't just pull over to the scenic overlook, look, and then get back in your car. Get out on the trail, and you'll get away from the people. Or get there really, really early. That middle picture was taken, that's like 5:30 in the morning, but to get to that point, we had to get there at about 3:45 to be able to get up during good lighting. All right, these are a couple of the things that contribute to living in the moment as well. Immersive experiences, appreciation of nature, which we've talked about. The picture that I showed you at the beginning of the talk was taken just outside of an island called Svalbard. How many of y'all know where that is? Yeah, so it's close-ish to Iceland. So I'm going to assume, and I know there's some students in the room, maybe even some faculty where geography might not be our strong suit, but assume we all know where Norway is. But if you go to Norway and then go to the top of Norway and then keep going northwest-ish for a while, you'll get to the island of Svalbard. The northernmost inhabited city in the world is on Svalbard. This is not near that city. So you get up to that city and then you keep going around Svalbard. These pictures were taken at various points around Svalbard. We were on what's called an icebreaker ship, which is necessary to go up there even in June when we were there last year because of, shockingly, ice. And you have to just get really lucky with the timing in terms of where you're going to get to. So just so happened that when we were up there, conditions were just right or wrong, because part of the reasons the conditions were just right was because of climate change. But the ice had started to melt a little bit earlier than it normally does. We were able to break through into a channel that no ship had been in during 2023. So we were the first people to be up there during that year, which was pretty cool, and gave us the opportunity to see things like from a distance, I assure you. I was not on the land with the polar bear. I was on the land with the reindeer, and this time I was using very fancy large telephoto lenses that I had rented specifically for this trip. But I can tell you that I have never more lived in the moment than I did on that trip. Because when you're up there, there's no internet. There's no internet on the ship. There's no internet, nothing. And I was in my role as a dean, and it was awesome because I had Dr. Newton filling in for me. And I said, look, stuff's going to happen. I can't answer the email. He's just going to, and he did. He did a great job, but there was no expectation that I could even respond to anything because I wouldn't be getting it. I mentioned digital detox. There's also the idea of solo exploration. And what I really want to talk about there is it doesn't have to be, you can redefine what you mean by solo, especially in the world in which we live. I pretty much always travel with my wife, but I still sort of view it as like a solo exploration. Very rarely are we with a tour group. And even if we are with a tour group, because it was helpful to get from like point A to point B, we then leave the group. We're the two that wander off because we want to go at our own pace and see our own things. That, again, allows you to sort of live in the moment where you're not worried about social interaction, or you're not thinking about the people around you, what you're going to do. You're just sort of in the moment experiencing it. The two pictures there with the adorable puffins were taken on Shetland Island, which is a part of Scotland, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. If any of you all have seen a puffin in the wild, yes, it's like, you probably can attest to this, it's like the definition of those little wind-up toys. So if you put a little crank on them and they just kind of like go like that, that's what they do. And they can fly, but they can't fly. They're the clumsiest, most hilarious flyers in the world, and you can stand there watching them for a very long time, and they'll look at you and they're curious, and it's great. The middle picture was taken just outside of actually Palm Springs, of all places. They've got these sort of large metallic statues that just sort of emerge from the desert, which was a pretty cool thing. All right. The second bullet point up here, I think, can be really helpful for people like myself. Like I mentioned, I like to have everything planned. I like everything in order. I have realized that in my everyday life, if my daily routine gets kind of disrupted, it messes with me a bit. It throws me off, and I just feel ill at ease. That's maybe not the healthiest thing to happen every day. When you're traveling, even if you have a plan, like I do, always, there's going to be spontaneity. Things are going to happen, are going to pop up that either you didn't plan for or that you just want to do. Both of these pictures were taken in Scotland, and both of these were great examples of spontaneity. We made a lot of decisions on the fly about, maybe we'll go over there instead of here, or maybe instead of going to spot X at 1 p.m. when everyone else is there, we'll go there at 10:30 at night because the sun is still up enough to see it, and you can avoid the crowd. So making those on-the-fly adjustments was really helpful in sort of teaching me the larger lesson of flexibility, which is going to be one of the points we talk about, and being willing to adapt and not letting it throw everything about who you are off. For other people, they're like, of course, I'm spontaneous, it's not an issue. But for routine-based folks like myself, very beneficial. All right, just a couple more pictures from, again, the trip that I thought was living in the moment the most for me this summer from the ship that I was on. And then I think this is a video, if it'll play, of some of the ice breaking that I was talking about, just to sort of show you what I was referring to. I would literally stand out here, it was like 20 degrees, and just look over the edge for like 30 minutes, sort of in a trance. It was very meditative. By the way, not everyone got up when they announced the polar bear, which to this day I find very strange. I'm like, why are you here? Some people willingly heard it and said, no, I went back to bed. And I'm thinking, we are very different people. So again, that would go on for hours and hours and hours as you're breaking through the ice. Okay, personal growth. A big part of this is just overall development as a person. I think it helps prevent us from stagnating when we get out and when we travel. Some people ask me how often I travel. Well, one of the reasons why, I'm just being perfectly honest, that I got into education in the first place was because of the calendar, because it provides us more opportunities to have time off, to travel, versus the corporate world, at least the corporate world that I grew up knowing about, right? My wife is a teacher, so she has very similar days off that I do, so it provides us a lot of chances to travel. So typically in a year, we'll travel over Christmas break in some way, over spring break for sure, usually take a small trip over like the spring holiday, and then usually our big trip when I take close to 3 weeks off of work, and my supervisors know this, any position I take, I tell them it's happening, I do it in the summer, typically, to get away from the heat. At least we try to get away from the heat. So a part of that personal growth, again, is learning about other people, respect for differences, and developing more of a cultural competence with having interactions with people. Now, I don't have any people on this slide. I have some amazing monkeys, but this is from the trip to Bali, and I put it up here in part because it was from that trip, also in part just because I wanted to show you some pictures of these guys because I thought they were hilarious, and you can spend a lot of time watching them. A big part of personal growth, and it kind of goes back to the very first slide when we're talking about reasons why people might not travel, is expanding your comfort zone. It can redefine what you're comfortable with. Again, both of these pictures were taken in Scotland, and the reason I put Scotland up here is because I had to drive on the wrong side, very American-centric view, wrong side, I'm just gonna say it, of the road. When we were planning this trip, initially, I was terrified of doing that, so much so that I was like, we'll just take trains, we'll take trains everywhere, because you know, Europe has a very good train system, to a point. When you get up to an area like Scotland, the trains are only gonna take you so far, and you're not gonna be able to see as much as you might wanna see if you don't drive. So this was 2 summers ago. I just decided without thinking about it much after having that initial thought, we're just gonna do it, I'm gonna rent a car, and I'm gonna drive. And I was very proud of myself, which might sound silly, but I was very proud of myself because the me of 5 years prior to that would not have done that. And had I done it, I would have been obsessing over it and stressing over it until the day of the trip. Instead, I basically just did it, didn't really think about it again until we picked up the car. And then honestly, it took like a day to adjust, and then it felt normal. So much so that when I returned here after driving on the wrong side of the road for 3 weeks, y'all know sorters? I found myself after work one day for about, it wasn't that long, but 10 to 15 seconds, driving on the left side of sorters as I left work, and I thought, oh no, I need to get over. Part of it might have been because the right side's all chopped up and messed up, but it happened in the summer of 2022. All right, some more examples of personal growth and how it can lead to confidence building and problem solving from the trips. That's also Scotland, one of the small towns that you could not have gotten to on a train, so I put a picture of it there. On the right, we have Mont Saint-Michel, which is in France. This is a great example of personal growth and spontaneity because this was not our intended destination. Where we had intended to go, the train got canceled, and this was farther away, but we thought, well, maybe we can figure out how to get there. And I didn't know what the tides were gonna be because the tides will come in, and you see all that beach. If the tides are in, it's covered in water, and you can't cross it. I mean, you could, but you might drown, so you don't want to, right? So we wound up there, and I'm very thankful that we did, because that picture's taken from a distance because it's the best sort of vantage point. But we walked into the town all the way up to the top there, and we would not have had that experience without some problem solving, without having the opportunity to revise and think about what we might want to do today as we're halfway through where we were going and the train gets rerouted. How many of y'all, I'm sure some of y'all know, that picture in the middle, where's that from? Chicago. I put Chicago there because Chicago has a very special meaning to me and always will. I mentioned Chicago was about 2 hours from South Bend. Chicago kept me sane in graduate school. There's about a 2.5-hour train called the South Shore Line. Very American train because it goes slower than the cars, which is the opposite of what you see most other places in the world. But we would go there probably once every month and a half. So I calculated in my 5 years in graduate school, I went to Chicago 31 times. And it helped sort of keep me going. It helped sort of reset me. And it taught me a lot about all of the things we're talking about now in terms of travel, because it was like my own little sort of workshop area to try out some of this stuff, to learn about public transit, because I had no experience with it outside of like some buses in San Antonio, some actual public transit, to get comfortable with that. And now my favorite thing wherever I go is to use the public transit. I want to travel the way people typically travel there because it's part of the experience, and learning some of those things happened in Chicago. All right, enhanced social skills. I mentioned my social anxiety. This was a big one for me, and it's helped in my travels. Now, of course, it teaches you tolerance, empathy, global citizenship, all that good stuff. It also forces you to talk to other people. A little bit less now than maybe in the past, because you can get away with doing a lot of stuff here and finding a lot of information. But at the end of the day, if you're gonna go up somewhere and like order some food, you're gonna have to speak to someone most of the time. So each of these 3 pictures are examples of conversations that I had during my travel. So that one on the left, that was taken in Prague, not this most recent winter, but the winter before. There was a woman with a little dumpling place, which she had it heated to probably 95 degrees in there, and I nearly died. But the dumplings were great, and we had a really interesting conversation with her because she was a Russian woman who had fled Russia in the early 90s when a lot of the changes over there were happening, and had settled in Prague, and she had a very interesting perspective on everything that was going on in the world and everything that is still going on in the world, and having that kind of discussion with her was very enlightening. It wouldn't have happened if we didn't go to this little hole-in-the-wall place that had like 2 chairs in it and have this meal. That girl right there, that was taken in New York, and I was standing there and I saw her get on the subway, and she had this lizard, and she saw me staring at it. I was trying to be cool, like, is that a real lizard? Is that a real lizard? And she takes her earbud out. She goes, do you want to take a picture of my lizard? I was like, I would love to take a picture of your lizard. So then we had a conversation about why she takes the lizard with her, and then she posed. She was like, I'm gonna be casual, and she like wanted to make it look like a little snapshot, right? So she takes the lizard with her because she had to overcome her own social anxiety given to some past experiences that she had with the subway. And the wizard, she said, made her feel secure, because now when people are looking at her, she's like, they're looking at me because of the lizard, right? It's not some other reason why they're looking at me. So it was a really fun interaction to have, and I got to see someone walking around with a wizard. This on the right was taken in Norway, where I had a very interesting exchange with the owner, who used to be a semi-professional soccer player, and his friend, who was sitting in the corner smoking like 50 cigarettes in a minute. I don't know how he did it. And he was just going through them and going through them. He found out we were from Houston, and he goes, Houston? And then he started talking about like every rapper ever, because apparently he is obsessed with rap, and he views Houston as like the mecca of rap music. So he was thrilled to hear all about Houston. Once that conversation ended, because it was about, I'd say 81, 82 degrees that day, which is warm for there, I was talking to the owner, and he goes, do you have this kind of heat in Texas? This was last summer. If you remember last summer, I said, oh, we have this kind of heat. And then, I'll never forget, he said, but it's not that humid, right? I had to explain to him, no, that's West Texas, it's not humid. We're in Houston, it's much more humid than where we are right now. This would be the nicest day we've had for probably 6 months. So those kinds of fun memories that you can form. All right, sometimes you're forced into social interaction, like I talked about. It's forced into a cultural exchange and sometimes minor conflict resolution. All of these pictures are taken from various Christmas markets in Europe. Some of you may have heard of the Christmas market scene there. It is huge, really from like Germany, Czech Republic, on over, really through England at this point too. We went on a trip 2 winters ago, mostly through Germany, a little bit of France, and then the Czech Republic. And to go to those markets, you're going to have a cultural exchange because you're going to a kiosk, you're going to have to talk to the person, you're going to have to find out what it is, how much it is, and you're going to have great food and a great time, but you're going to be forced out of your comfort zone. Would not have happened if I was not willing to do that. And then you're going to meet people that you may or may not stay in touch with, but you're going to learn things about them, and you're going to learn where they come from. So this picture of me and that gentleman right there who lives in Portland and is a doctor was taken this summer during the Svalbard trip that I was telling you about. When we became heroes. We saved someone's life. At least that's the way we tell the story. In reality, we were walking around and one of the people who was on the trip with us had essentially stepped into what I would call quicksand to the point where it was up to his knees and he could not get out. So we spent 30 minutes digging through the mud to pull him out, and you can bet we milked that the rest of the trip for all that it was worth. These folks up here were on the same trip and they were all from very different places. From left to right, Sweden, a northern area of Sweden, is actually a native Swede, like indigenous Swede, like we have indigenous Americans. She's a Sami, which is the name of the people there, and she has some very interesting things to tell us about her culture and their traditions. The gentleman next to her is Canadian. The guy in the middle is a British photographer who has spent time working and publishing for National Geographic. Next to him was a doctor from the Bronx who grew up with Dr. Oz, and he did not have good things to say, which was very interesting, right? Also, George Stephanopoulos, he had much more positive things to say about him. And then the woman on the right is from Greenland. So just hearing about their different experiences is really valuable because you could read about it in a book, you could watch a documentary, but hearing it firsthand provides a different kind of insight. Learning and discovery. All of these things that we've talked about contribute to learning and discovery. But there's one, in the interest of time, because I knew we'd get to this point in the talk, that I really want to focus on. It's been huge for me, and it's one of the #1 reasons why I travel. And it's culinary education. It's eating the food wherever you go. So you're about to see a lot of food pictures. I could have made the entire talk about food because that's what I enjoy doing the most. But I just want to run you through so you know what you're looking at, what it was, where I got it. Sandwich that nearly killed me on the east end of London because they put this horseradish on it that I swear almost made me pass. I've had horseradish, I've had wasabi, whatever was on there almost made me pass out. A crepe in France, which I thought I hated until I had them in France. It was actually really good. I don't know where that middle one is or even what it is. I think it might have been in Alsace in France, Germany. At the top, those were mussels in London. On the right is one of my favorite restaurants in the world in New York. It's a Sichuanese restaurant. Below that, the thing that looks very stereotypically British that's a Scottish breakfast. And to the right of that is an Indonesian chicken dish. And then we got a bunch more delicious looking food up here. That big pot of paella, which I had in Valencia, nearly killed me because I ordered it. And my wife doesn't like any seafood, which is a shame for her. So I'm sitting there thinking, I have to eat this whole thing, right? I did eat the whole thing. We were there for like an hour and a half or two. She had been done with her meal for a long time as I'm still sort of plowing through it. I don't think there's anything else up there that needs a whole lot of explanation, but a lot of good food that we have then incorporated into our everyday lives. One of the things we like to do most, and this started when I was in grad school, so we didn't have money to be able to go out to eat whenever we wanted, but it was the weekend. We didn't want to eat our healthy meals during the week or on the weekend. So we'd go out to eat for like a really cheap place on Friday night, and then Saturday night we'd make what we'd call a fun meal, an unhealthy meal that's maybe based on something we wanted to eat. At that time, living in South Bend and missing San Antonio, it was making our own tortillas and basically eating that every Saturday. Since then, we've developed sort of a large, sort of rotating menu of food that we go through. And this is just some of the stuff that we make now on Saturday nights together and eat during the weekends. And we make everything ourselves. By everything, I mean like the bread in the picture. We make the bread because my wife is like, we're making the bread. We're not buying the bread. We got to do the bread right. So it's been really rewarding because now we can have some of this food that otherwise you may have had to go to a location outside of Houston to get. It also, there's two things here. It also provided me with the excuse to show you my wife who was on Jeopardy and gave her, if any of you have watched Jeopardy, they go in and they ask them to tell some like funny or interesting anecdote about themselves. Her anecdote when she was on the show, because she was only on once because she didn't win, is that she was talking about how we travel around, take recipes back, and make them. So that was a fun excuse for me to put the Jeopardy picture up there. All right, and then the final item I want to talk about here, increased adaptability. I've kind of been talking a little bit about it throughout the talk. It kind of underscores everything we're focusing on. But this, in terms of psychological benefits, has actually been the one that's been measured empirically the most in terms of like actually looking at brains before and after travel. And there's some surprising things that you see. Probably not that surprising to most of y'all that you see more open-mindedness, things like that. But you see enhanced problem-solving skills. You see more cognitive flexibility. These were all taken in Shetland, which I mentioned. It's an island about 14 hours by ferry from Scotland, which is one of my favorite places in the world. Getting there took a lot of problem-solving skills because I had to figure out how we were going to work this into our itinerary with a car to get on the ferry, to be able to get there, because it was mostly booked up, and figuring out how to get there and having the flexibility to change plans as needed provided us with the opportunity to go see those beautiful puffins that we would not have otherwise seen. Stress management. It can help you understand how to deal with stressful situations that maybe are unique to travel but can apply in your everyday life. So 2 quick pictures up here. This was taken this winter. That is in Burano, which is an island just outside of Venice. It's basically connected to Venice, Italy. I was there alone by myself because my wife was in the hotel room throwing up because she had food poisoning. So I want to be clear, I didn't say peace, and then I'm going to go over here to Burano. I talked to her beforehand, and she was like, number 1, get out. I don't want you here right now. Number 2, please go do something, because then I'm not feeling bad about what's happening right now, because she had food poisoning. So going there myself and being willing to go there myself and seeing it was an adaptation that I didn't really know that I had. This trip are the sand dunes that you're seeing there. That's Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. That was part of the COVID trip. The adaptability of, it's summer of 2020, I've got to travel, what can I do safely? Well, let's go to parks where there's no one around, and then we can mask up in the parks, and we'll be fine. It's one of the best trips I've taken, and honestly, if not for that time period, I probably wouldn't have been on that trip yet. It probably wouldn't have been a prioritized trip for me, and it was really rewarding to have that experience to drive around. Scotland again, more adaptability. We've talked about that in terms of confidence, comfort zone. And then the last sort of couple pictures I want to talk about here have to do with when things go wrong, because they definitely go wrong, and you have to adapt and have an increased tolerance here. The tolerance I'm specifically talking about is tolerance for things going wrong. They're outside of your control, not tolerance for other people. That's a different discussion. I already talked about the middle picture. That was my wife getting sick. The picture on the right, that was me parking on the ferry in Shetland with a rental car, and I was absolutely terrified of it. Little did I know that was the easy part. The bad part came when we got there, and they're like, all right, time to get out. And I'm like, but the door's not open. They're like, yeah, it is, it's behind you. And you're not just gonna reverse out because it's behind you and up a ramp, but there's not enough room for you to turn the car around, so you have to reverse it and then reverse up the ramp and then drive out the door. So figuring out how to do that was fun, especially because the person 2 cars before me, in the process of doing it, you hear boom, and slammed into the back. So that did not happen. We made it out, which was good. This sort of nondescript picture, it's not a very good picture. It's of a Christmas market in Dusseldorf. The adaptability there is this was the night before we were supposed to fly back to the States. Our train from Dusseldorf, which was the last train of the night to get back to Frankfurt, where our flight flew out of, was canceled. So then I had to run around and try to ask a bunch of people how to get back. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Found someone in a German military uniform who said, he didn't say, I overheard him talking about getting back to Frankfurt. So then I just followed him around and followed him onto a train. And that train eventually got us to Frankfurt at like 3 in the morning, but we made it there. And then finally, I want to leave you with a little comedy here in terms of increased adaptability. That picture was taken in Disneyland Paris. Which I guess is going to be great. Disneyland Paris, it was 106 degrees. And the adaptation there was go to every single bathroom you see and take a shower in the sink and slick your hair back, which is what I did. These 2 were taken on a PTK trip with Dr. Newton. They know that I like to use credit card points when I travel overseas because I like to travel comfortably now when I go overseas. So they were giving me a hard time. They're like, oh, have you ever flown in economy before? What is this like? I'm like, yes, but the flight attendant overheard. Best flight attendant ever, gave me a hard time the entire flight, gave me those wings, that note, and a children's travel kit to keep me entertained. And then this is a picture of my wife There was, I don't remember, I think this was like 2022, but there was a wave of COVID going around. We really didn't want to get sick going on our trip. So she's double masked, and then she thought, you know, I'm going to put my jacket over my face. And she spent the entire flight like that as well. I'm going to skip over that and just leave you, in the interest of time, with my favorite picture that I've taken that I think summarizes all of these together. This was in Big Bend National Park, probably 7 or 8 years ago. I spent about an hour and a half outside. This is when I had my nicer camera, taking a long exposure, because it combined two of my passions in terms of space and learning about space and travel, to take these star trails to sort of prove the rotation. This is what shows you the rotation of the Earth. And if anyone thinks the Earth is flat, I would like for them to explain this picture to me. All right, so that is all I've got for you. Thank you for listening. I hope those of you who haven't traveled before, as you're getting older and have the means and ability to travel, you consider making it a part of your life, because it is very rewarding. Thank you.